we have got the four main party leaders with us. They have the most candidates in the election for Birmingham. We want to thank them all for being here. We want to thank you all for being out with us this morning who are live in our audience, all you who are tuning in via New Star Radio, and all of those who are on the Aston Students Union's Instagram as well. Thank you for being with us today. We have to make up about 10 minutes, so I'm going to be quick. We're going to get straight into it. We have got a whole host of questions that have already come in, plus we want to hear from you guys as well, because this is what the Different Anglez Show is about. It's always been about creating platforms to hear the people's voice, the citizens of Birmingham and wider afield. This is why we do what we do on the Different Anglez Show. We're going to go straight into introducing our guests. Firstly, with us, we want to thank you all for being with us. And we have got Robert Alden, who is the Conservative Party Group leader, who's just right next to me. Good morning. We have got Julian Pritchard as well, who is the first Green councillor in Birmingham City Council as well. Thank you for being with us. We've got John Hunt, who is the leader of the Lib Democrat group in Birmingham. And finally, our current leader of Birmingham City Council, who's battling to stay there while the rest are fighting to try and take it off him, is Ian Ward from the Labour Party. Thank you all for being with us today. So we're going to get straight into asking our first question, and then I'm going to go over to the Student Union President for his question. We will be having a 10-minute break at 10:55 till 11, and then we will be continuing on until close at 12 o'clock. So our first question is, elections are known for having poor turnouts. Why is it important for people to vote in elections? So we're going to start with Julian Pritchard from the Green Party.
Thanks, Charmaine, and just say thanks very much for organising this today. Why vote? So how you are represented is important, and your vote in this council election will primarily decide who represents you on the council, and that's crucial. It decides how you'll be represented in that council chamber, where decisions like the city's budget are being made, how you're represented on how the city's developed, what the council prioritises, and that's absolutely crucial to get that right. It's also about who's going to be campaigning with you and listening to you as a community. And a good councillor can make or break community campaigns, or how you're supported with any local issues you've got. So it's really crucial to get that right and to get the right person to represent you. What this election probably won't do is probably won't decide which party wants the council. It'll almost certainly still be Labour. But what it will do is give you a voice to who is best to hold that Labour leadership to account on this council, and who can make sure that you get your voice heard in that, and maybe even change some of the things that they're doing that you don't like. It also sends a message. So if you're not happy about something, it sends a message, depending on who you vote for, how you want that changed. And obviously I'd argue that our campaigns and candidates who spend time listening and working in communities across the city are best placed to do that and represent you in your area.
Thank you. John, please.
Morning all. Very simply, if you don't go to the polling station, you sort of undermine your right to complain when things go wrong. And I use that phrase advisedly because I recognise that when you vote you have to choose often between options that you may not fully agree with. Even I don't fully agree with my own party sometimes. But that's the nature of politics. You only get limited choices on the ballot paper. And a little secret you may not know is that actually the candidates see all those little messages that people write on ballot papers when they're a bit unhappy with the choices they're offered. So it's worth making the trip just for that. So voting, the people we elect determine our taxes, and that's really important. It's a huge part of people's budgets. It's really important, and it's like having not choosing your fuel company, because it's like allowing somebody to charge you huge bills for fuel, and doing nothing about it if you don't vote. You need to vote to make sure that you are represented. And secondly, on a local level, particularly in council elections, and Julian's very right about this, it's the people you elect locally play a huge influence in your community. They play a huge influence in how the council operates in your community. And frankly, as councillors, we find there's an awful lot of things that we can make happen in our communities. We're often very, very frustrated by the limitations that we face in trying to make things happen, but nevertheless, we do have to recognise that we have a huge influence, and the people who elect us need to take advantage of that and choose the people best able to represent them in their community, and best able and who are closest to what they want to see happen in their community.
Thank you. Robert Alden, please.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here today. Voting is an incredibly important thing to do, and I'd urge you all, obviously I'm going to, through the course of today, ask you to vote for your local Conservative candidates, but I would urge you, even if you're not going to do that, to do make sure you go out. People die for people to have the right to vote, so it's really important that everyone does actually use that and go along and vote, and if they don't agree with any of the candidates, you can always spoil your ballot, though obviously I'd rather you vote for your local Conservative candidate. Birmingham's an incredible city. I'm a Birmingham born and bred myself. I love Birmingham. I've chosen to stay here, went to university here, stayed here, bringing my family here. And we absolutely want to see the best of Birmingham. Now, you'll hear a lot through the course of today from Councillor Ward saying that no other party has a positive vision or view of Birmingham. That's not true. What our criticism is, it's not with the city, it's not with the people of Birmingham. The city's amazing, the people are amazing. It's with the Labour administration in Birmingham, who have let down our city. That's why when you go out on the streets of Birmingham, you see litter that is uncollected, because they've been let down by this Labour administration. That's why we've got a plan for cleaning up Birmingham. A plan to increase recycling rates in our city, to expand it to include food waste recycling, and to make sure bins are collected weekly and on time, because there's been over 500,000 missed collections over the last few years. Plan to have a dedicated clean-up crew for each neighbourhood to make sure streets are clean. Plan to retain mobile household recycling centres, and to introduce free bulky waste collections and free garden waste collections. And a plan to increase enforcement, having more CCTV and more litter wardens across the whole of the city, not just focused in the city centre as they have under current administration. These elections are going to be really close. The last election, Labour kept control by only 4,500 votes across 17 wards. So if you vote for your local Conservatives this time, you will vote for a local, hard-working councillor who will make a change in your community and change control of the council. Thank you.
Ian Ward, over to you.
Thanks very much, Charmaine. Well, obviously I agree that it's very important to vote. Birmingham is a huge city. It's 1.1 million people, and the City Council provides many of the services that people in this city rely upon in order to live their lives comfortably. But the Birmingham Labour Party has set out a vision for the future of this city in our manifesto. This document is 60 pages long, and it sets out how we will move this city forward, delivering the living wage jobs, the homes, the opportunities, and we've made record investments in cleaning up our streets. We've worked with the Police and Crime Commission to begin to rebuild community policing that has been dismantled by the Conservative government over the last decade. And we're attracting record levels of investment to this city to improve the lives and life chances of people and every community. And it's the Labour Party in Birmingham that is tackling the climate crisis. We've kick-started our journey towards clean air, not just in the city centre, but right across Birmingham. And we have steered this city through a decade of Tory cuts, then the pandemic, and despite the ongoing challenges, I know this will be a golden decade going forward for the people of Birmingham. And the choice at this election is very, very simple. I would encourage you to read the Tory party manifesto and see that they do not have any plan for the future of this city. The choice is simple. You can either vote for Labour's plan for a cleaner, safer and better Birmingham, or you can end up with a Conservative council that constantly talks Birmingham down. And we cannot afford the double whammy of an incompetent and deceitful Tory government in Westminster and an uncaring Conservative administration in Birmingham who have nothing to offer this city. And the Conservative Party in Birmingham are so ashamed of the government in Westminster that they're not standing under the Conservative banner, they are standing as local Conservatives. And you might not blame them for that, but don't be fooled. They are no different from the Conservatives in Westminster who set up the rules, broke the rules and lied to the people of this country.
Now we're going to go over to a question from the Student Union President. So those with the mics, if you don't mind bringing it over. So if you can just introduce yourself to our guests online and also in the room, and then answer the questions, please.
Thank you, Charmaine. My name is Balraj Gurwal, and I'm the President of the Aston University Students Union. Speak louder. Okay, yeah, switch it on. Switch it on? Is that great? Thank you, Charmaine. My name is Balraj, the Aston University Students Union President, and thank you all for coming today. The question that I have for you all today is, how necessary and important is community development for you and the education of Birmingham going forward? Because, you know, student fees have gone up now. That's something that students are getting very stressed about, and also then going forward, interest rates are going up as well. How are you going to tackle this?
Thank you. I've got it all planned out here, the order. So I'm going to start with Jonathan.
Thank you, and thank you for your hospitality today. Can I just go back to you just to understand what you're asking about? You're asking particularly about student fees, because you mentioned about community development in your first half and education broadly.
So I'm asking on a whole like student generic basis. So it could be like the students that's from a low socioeconomic background, if they're from a different, let's say at Aston, there's a lot of students.
So opportunities.
Yeah, opportunities. Where's the opportunity? How you can tackle that? How you support that?
So obviously at city council level, the ability to influence the tuition fees and what's happening at the moment, which I believe is very scandalous, where interest rates are being hiked up for tuition fee payers. I think that's utterly scandalous. It's very difficult at city council level. What the city council needs to be doing is working to ensure opportunity for all young people across the city and ensuring that they're well placed if they go to university to make the most of that, to make the most of that opportunity and to get that opportunity if they want to have that opportunity, and to find the alternative opportunities if they're not available. It's still very challenging for the city council because a lot of schools have been detached from it via the academy programme, so its ability to shape education is a lot more limited than it was. But I, in the course of my council career, have worked quite hard over the years and looked at policies and what should be done about this, and sought to influence policies both nationally and locally, so that we have a much wider range of opportunities for young people, in particular that young people are not left behind, because you still see, and you go into the education statistics, you still see large numbers of young people who are simply going through the education system and getting too little out of it, and often that's because the system is too geared towards very precise and very specific exams, whereas young people may well benefit from a much wider range of choice and opportunity, and they may benefit from courses which link their interests, which may be in mechanics or whatever, with what they need to learn academically, and those kind of joined up courses are quite difficult to access very often. So there's a lot of work City Council can do to influence this, and it should be doing it, and it should be doing it under clear leadership.
IAmBham, please.
Well, seeing as I'm following John from the Liberal Democrat Party, perhaps I'd start by reminding everyone back in 2010 it was the Liberal Democrats who promised to scrap tuition fees, and of course as soon as they were in government with their Tory party, they abandoned that promise. So I don't know whether you can trust very much that they say to you in this field of education. Equality of opportunity, of course, is the core value of the Labour Party. We believe passionately in equality of opportunity for everyone. So education is really important within the Labour Party. Someone who had a far bigger career than me in the Labour Party once said education, education, education were the priorities of the Labour Party. I think that's very true. If we're to give people meaningful careers in this city, then we have to not only provide the jobs in this city, and we are creating 100,000 jobs, the Labour Party in Birmingham, over the next decade, but we also have to ensure that people have the education to get the qualifications that will give them access to those jobs. And over the last decade, when we've been in control of the council, we have created jobs that have increased the rate of graduate retention in the city of Birmingham. So the professional jobs you can get in the city centre, the high-level manufacturing and engineering jobs you can get right across this city have helped retain graduates in Birmingham. And we know, and we will continue to work to close that skills gap to ensure that people graduating from Aston University can access those jobs in the future and have a meaningful career here in Birmingham and live the rest of their lives here in Birmingham. Thank you.
Thank you. Julian Pitcher.
Yeah, thank you for the question. You talked about community development in your question, and very much community work and being grassroots and working with communities is very much a core part of the Green Party values. It's very much in our DNA, it's what we're about. And I think absolutely you're right, education is crucial to people being able to move forward, move on and succeed in life. It's absolutely what's happened to kind of higher education over the last 10, 12, 15 years or more has been absolutely scandalous. The Green Party nationally has been consistent in opposing fees and opposing kind of the commercialisation and to a certain extent privatisation and marketisation of higher education. It's a public good, it should be funded as such, and there shouldn't be the barriers to higher education that are financial, and I think the fact that that's more and more of that's been put in is an outrage. But as has also been said, that is not in the council's gift a lot of the time. What the council can do is make sure that the education is under its control, it's got rights, people have got the opportunity to go to university or other things that they want to do, and it needs to make sure it gets that right. But also, you know, the government's got to play its part as well, and in ways I've just outlined. But make no mistake, you know, the current situation is making it very difficult for people. The academy system is, you know, making things worse, not better. In my ward, we used to have a secondary school called Baverstock that got shut mostly because it failed as an academy, and the children now have to travel much further to their local school. There is no local school in the local patch, and losing facilities like that is really not helping the opportunity and the development that you'd like to see.
Thank you. While we're moving into our next one, Robert Oldham, I just want to remind you all that we have a hashtag today, and it's hashtag local elections 2022.
Thank you. And any leader who sits here and tries to claim their party's had nothing to do with these, frankly, is conning you, because they came in under Tony Blair, they increased under Gordon Brown, and have remained under the coalition and Conservative government since. So I think, you know, all the leaders just should be honest with you about that. In terms of education, the Conservative Council would be absolutely committed to ensuring that all children in our city are able to fulfil their potential. And that's a really important thing across the city. It shouldn't matter where you were born in our city, you should be given the start in life to ensure you can fulfil and maximise your potential, and that's what Conservative Council would do. We'd be looking to work with schools across the city so that the very successful COVID tutoring programme that's been taking place to help children who missed out on their education actually can become a permanent thing in our schools, and be able to help those children from disadvantaged backgrounds to be able to make sure they're getting all of the support they need to maximise their education. We'd be working to ensure that schools provide financial education as well. We'd also be working with companies across the city to make sure that the skills and education attainment that's being taught in our schools actually match the skills that are needed for the jobs of the future, so we can make sure that those jobs that are being created in Birmingham go to the Birmingham residents and people who are living in our city. And with community development, Conservatives very much believe we'd want to be working the council services very much as it's designed by communities. So we'd be looking to localised services, we'd be having local community chest budgets that would be funding out in local communities like they used to be when we last ran the council, so that local communities can access funding to be able to help support the services they want in their local area.
Thank you. So again, I just want to remind everybody about our social medias. So you can find me on at Different Angles, on Facebook, The Different Angles Show, and on Instagram, Different Angles. But Different Angles has a Z, not an S. Just have to make sure you all know that. Also, the Student Union as well, it's at Aston_Union, Facebook, / Aston Union, and Instagram, Aston SU. Our hashtags for today are local elections 2022, hashtag Birmingham Hustings, and hashtag local elections 2020. So for all of you in the digital realm, if you have got questions, if you just put the hashtag, it will be easier for Sam and those who are following to pick up your questions can actually see them as well. We've had a lot of questions around diversity come in to us, and I'd like to start with inviting Jagwant Johal from the Birmingham Race Impact Group to start this questioning around diversity and equality in our city.
Thank you, Charmaine. When the elections were announced, we sent each party on the platform today the Birmingham Race Equality Manifesto. Only one of the parties on the platform has responded to us, so could we take this opportunity to hear from you as to your views on that manifesto and whether you would be adopting it if you get into power?
Can we just have like a key point or two for those who may not know what the manifesto entails?
Okay, the manifesto is 15 points in terms of driving forward race equality in Birmingham. It starts at the top with Birmingham being an anti-racist city. It looks at trying to put in a sort of framework where it doesn't exist. For example, Robert's just mentioned schools. Yeah, schools are no longer under the control of the local authority. They're in single foundation schools, they're in sort of map platforms, but the whole issue of sort of racial equality and the disparities that start from the cradle to the sort of grade, we're talking about sort of universities here, and even when children get to sort of university and get the qualification, there's still an attainment gap. So what we've actually had up to now is a lot of activity on trying to tackle the symptoms of racism as opposed to the causes of racism. So what those 15 points do is put together a framework to actually get some real work done on race equality in Birmingham.
Thank you. So we'll start with Ian.
Well, first of all, let me just deal with the Race Equality Manifesto, because we have responded to this and we are in support of the 15 pledges. There's only one of them actually, Jagwant, that we just seek some further clarity on. It's the very last one, in actual fact, on how this National Centre for World Cultures would actually operate and come about. But we don't have any issue with anything else. As I said at the very beginning, equality is the core value of the Labour Party. Pledge number 9, which is about what's happened in London, Liverpool and Bristol. Earlier this week I was on a call to the directly elected Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees. I've had a conversation with him about what they're doing in the area of pledge number 9, and he's linked me up with Bristol University, a history unit there who've done the work in Bristol, and we'll be speaking to them in due course. I, of course, when I became leader of the council, brought about the first administration in the history of Birmingham. It was gender balanced, 5 cabinet members are female, 5 are male, 2 African Caribbean females, and 2 others are Asian Muslims. The most diverse administration in the history of the council. And as I said at the very beginning, the Conservatives are running as local Conservatives, but make no mistake, they have the same beliefs as their colleagues in Westminster. And over the last decade, the Conservative government has presided over the Windrush scandal. They've brought through the Nationality and Borders Bill, which will give the Home Secretary powers to strip people who have lived their whole lives in this country of their citizenship, and they're now going to deport refugees fleeing conflict and persecution to Rwanda, where they're saying they'll stay indefinitely. I'm quite clear, Birmingham's greatest strength is its diversity, and we need to build on that for the future.
Thank you. Julian? Michelle?
Yeah, so absolutely, I can say that we support the manifesto, and sort of why it's a systemic issue and needs a systemic kind of policy response. As your manifesto correctly states, Birmingham will be 50% DARE, but even if that were not the case, it would be still the right thing to do to correct injustice and make sure that we are tackling this issue across the city. No one should suffer systemic barriers, and there are too many left in the city, barriers to access to education, to employment, and it's absolutely not on. And as you rightly said, we really need to be tackling these on a kind of policy systemic level. In terms of what the council can do, your points in the manifesto are excellent. The council is doing some stuff, but it could go further. Pay transparency is a good start, but there are still barriers to employment, and even elected on Birmingham City Council as well, as elected councillors. And you may have noticed this entire panel is white and male, and that says something about how our parties are selecting leadership candidates. So yeah, it absolutely is vital, and yeah, I'm happy to say that we support it, and thank you very much for the question.
Robert Alden.
Thank you. Birmingham is the Commonwealth city, if you like. If you look across the city, pretty much every nation from the Commonwealth is represented here, and immigration has played a really important part of our city's history, and really is part of the culture and the DNA of what makes Birmingham so great, and you can see it wherever you go in the city, and the positive impact that's had on our city. It's an area which actually all the leaders across this hustings today have all worked together on the City Council, because you'll get lots of political back and forth, but actually it's one of the issues where all the groups work together to help make sure that we're promoting equality and tackling racism in the city. And I think that's a really important thing. There are obviously areas where we have differences and areas where we also want to make sure our common goals of promoting those in the city happen. And so that is very much what happened. It's something that would continue happening if we were in control of council. And we'd very much...
It's not very diverse, the Conservative group though, is it?
It's considerably more diverse since I became leader, and changed that. And it's also, the last elections in 2018 had the most diverse range of candidates in the city, and you only have a couple of more diverse candidates this time. But Ian, it's okay, I'm always happy for you to interrupt me like you do at every hustings. Jaguar, thank you very much for your manifesto, and if we take control of council, we'll be very happy to work with you and see what we can do to help out with this.
Jonathan.
Thank you. First of all, an apology because I actually had to take a week out because of bereavement at the outset of the campaign. I've noticed your follow-up emails, and I'm afraid when I came off for that week out, I had to work with our manifesto group to finalise our manifesto. So there was a lot of information flowing around at that point. I remember working with you last year in the PCC elections, and some very useful input from the race partnership. At that point, I'd like to look at your manifesto and your proposals, and I think before or after an election these sort of things are very helpful, because I think we do recognise the challenges, and as has been said, we typify it here, four white male blokes sitting here. It's a sort of an accident, sort of typifies the problems, and we can't individually resolve it very, very easily, but we need to improve the diversity within the council, we need to improve diversity within council management, and we need to improve diversity within the council workforce. Our group, we have possibly the most diverse group in the council. We're 3 of our 8 councillors are ethnic minorities. Our council candidate range is very, very diverse. I think we have the only candidate from the Somali community, which is a significant community within the city, in our group, and we will continue to foster diversity. And I try and work with promising people of all backgrounds to help them and encourage them to come forward. Now, we have some brilliant campaigners on our team this time, and because there is so much discontent across the city with the way the council is running, I do hope we get some changes. I hope we get new councillors with real potential who get elected this time in some of the communities which in the past have been seen to deliver 2 safe majorities for Labour, because those safe majorities create complacency, and that's a problem we've had.
So we're going to stay on this theme for the...
Well, I can't sign up to something I haven't fully read yet. I'm not going to admit to having read it, but I know your input is really, really useful on these things, and there's a lot more I'd like to say about it in the time available.
So we're going to move into our next question. I see you, but first behind you, Matty Hales. I know that you've got a question, so if you could just wait for the mic for us.
Oh, thank you. Where should I begin? They call me a veteran. It means that I've been around a long time. The BNP referred to me as what? Mad Max. I wear that with, what do you call it? I take that as pride, because I've been around and I've haunted them for a long time. Now I'd like to just bring the black perspective to this thing. And when I say black, I'm not talking about the political black. I'm talking about the black that looks like me, like African and Caribbean community. One of the problems we face is when we apply for grants, state aid grants, whatever, it seems as our applications have been marginalized. Yeah? It's been marginalized, and unless it's on the back of the BAME or BNE community, we don't seem to get anything. We don't seem to get anything. Why can't the African and Caribbeans be prominent in this field? We're always marginalized. Now, the other thing I want to just bring to people's attention, simple this. Research shows that 65% of school children will be from BME community. My question to all of you is simple this. And we've been talking about this for years, if I remember, about 20 years. What plans have you got to reflect and address the fact that this city, whether you like it or not, is going to be a black minority ethnic city? What plans have you got to address those issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Robert Holden.
Thank you, Matty. Great to see you again, and it's great to have you here. Absolutely horrified to hear that your comments around applications from your community have been rejected for no good reason, and that's totally unacceptable and something will change if the Conservative group is in control. And if you've got some examples you want to raise or have someone raise in the council, please do send them through. More than happy to take that up for you, because that is totally unacceptable. In terms of our plans to help make sure we reflect the city, we've got some really high quality candidates from the African Caribbean community standing for us in very winnable seats, indeed Conservative held seats. So whether it's Rachel Hello standing up in Perry Common, who's done a huge amount of work in the community across the city, particularly around immigration cases, because she's a solicitor by trade, and Tyrese Romain in Castle Vale, two outstanding candidates who I know will have a really huge role to play on the council if they're so fortunate to be elected next week in the election.
Thank you. Ian Ward.
Thank you. I too am somewhat shocked at the grants point that you make. I wasn't clear whether you were talking about government grants or local authority grants, but if it's the local authority now, I'd certainly like to have some information from you about that. On the question of prominence for the African Caribbean community in this city, well, I absolutely believe in that. When I became the leader of the council, I appointed 2 African Caribbean women as cabinet members, first time that's ever happened in the history of the city. The Labour Party here in Birmingham has also had or nominated 2 African Caribbean people as Lord Mayor of the city. Sybil Spence was the first black Lord Mayor in the history of the city, and of course since then Yvonne Mosquito, another member of the Labour group, has also become the Lord Mayor of the city of Birmingham. So we, as I keep saying, equality is at the core of the Labour Party's beliefs. The issue that we are setting out that we're going to tackle in our manifesto document is around education and the way that the education system in this country, let alone this city, is failing two particular cohorts. The first is white working class boys and the second is African Caribbean boys. And we have to get into the inner workings of the education system in this city to understand why that's happening, and we need to bring forward reforms so that everybody in this city can achieve to the very best of their ability through the education system. And at the moment, the education system is failing white working class boys and it's failing African Caribbean boys, and we've got to change that going forward.
John Hunt.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Maxie. And obviously, in terms of the grants you haven't got, I think we need more information. It sounds concerning. Some of your question follows on from the previous question, the discussions we were having about that, and particularly around how we improve and diversify representation in future in the city. And as I said, my group is probably the most diverse group on the city council, proportionately. Quite small, 3 out of 8 ethnic minorities, and as group leader I've made a point of ensuring that all our councillors, whatever their background, whatever their educational background, work to their potential. And often we've had to battle to enable councillors from ethnic minorities to be heard in the council chamber, but we have made sure that they are heard and that they get a chance to speak for their communities and about their background and so forth. I'm going to do a political nerd thing here, because one thing that we advocate, and we have not gained support within the council chamber for this particularly, is that we move to a decent system of proportional representation, and by that I mean the single transferable vote, which is the system they use in Ireland, because that enables representation from minority communities. At the moment, there is too much majoritarianism in Birmingham, so particularly when we've been down to one-member wards for councillors, in particular, it means that only one ethnic minority gets represented, or one ethnic group gets represented in a ward. And I think I referred to the fantastic Capital Car Rumi, who's standing for us in Newtown, which I think is a really interesting ward this time, and really needs a change of representation because of the poor quality of representation it's had up to now. But we have advocated, particularly if we bring forward community councils in the city, that we have genuine single transferable voting, so there's full representation of all communities, and that if you had community councils, you start to bring forward people who can represent their communities and then move on to be effective city councillors. We just don't have those kind of pathways at the moment in our city. It's a real problem.
Julian.
Thank you for the question. What you're saying about the grant funding is true. That's absolutely outrageous. I often see how grants are given out and looking at how community groups get funding and which community groups often get funded by bodies, whether it's the council or other bodies. It does often feel like it's those community groups that might have the social capital, let's say, to be able to write applications that are going to push the right buttons with funders that seem to get obviously preferential, and you've got to look at kind of why that is. Certain communities therefore get sometimes overlooked because they don't know how to play the system or access the system in the same way. I think that does happen. I have seen examples of it, of certain areas of the city, community groups getting better or doing better out of grants, whether that's a local or national grant than others. If there's a particular issue that you know of that's happened, then absolutely that should be investigated. But I think there is a bias there as well that's kind of inherent in the system. I think one solution would possibly be some sort of blind process for grant funding, a bit like we do for jobs, or some organisations do for job applications, where you don't actually know the kind of name of when you're actually assessing it. That possibly would help and eliminate some of that. In terms of wider question on representation, absolutely, political groups and the council need to do far more to increase that. I'm already thinking ahead myself in terms of our party for the next set of elections and kind of how we were able to kind of build that for 2026. We have some fantastic candidates and campaigners across the city already from diverse backgrounds. Siobhan Harper-Nunn's in Gravelly Hill is some fantastic community work there. and would make a fantastic councillor if she got elected. And we're looking to kind of build more candidates like her in the future.
Thank you. We're going to go over to Sam right now, who's going to read out one of the questions that has been sent in to us, and then we're going to go for our break. So we're going to cut down the time to 1 minute 30.
Thanks, Charmaine. From Siobhan, at the current rate of progress, when will all Birmingham residents have pollution-free air?
So, John, over to you.
At the current rate of progress, I don't know, is the answer. I think we're a long way from it, and the clean air zone in the city centre, our group has had many criticisms of it, but we supported the concept of it because we recognise that we need to move on clean air, and in our manifesto we proposed ways to reform it. At the moment it's a disaster because the charging system doesn't work. Too many charges being paid in fines, and the money received from it has been misapplied to paving in the city centre, whereas we need action across the whole of the city. We proposed in particular that if you have a stream of revenue from the city centre charging, that revenue it goes out across the city very, very clearly, in a very, very clear process, centred in particular on school zones, because it's schools in particular in local communities where you see the impact of very, very poor air quality of cars sitting outside school entrances with their engines idling, fumes belching into the faces of children and toddlers in pushchairs. We proposed a plan that will see action outside every school in the city to deliver clean air.
Thank you. Ian.
Thank you, and thank you for that question, because I think it's a very important public health issue within our city. Poor air quality causes the death of 900 people each and every year here in Birmingham, and it is poisoning our children's lungs. Legally, we are under a duty to clean up Birmingham's air in the shortest possible time frame. So we have spent a lot of time looking at the data across the city, and that has led to the current scheme of the clean air zone over the city centre, everything inside the inner ring road, which the data tells us, and the data has been agreed with the government, will clean up Birmingham's air across the entirety of the city in the shortest time frame. You're going to hear some nonsense from Robert Alden about a magic hedge shortly. The magic hedge idea will not clear up Birmingham's air in the shortest possible time frame. They also talk about scrapping the zone. The zone is designed to clean up Birmingham's air. It's agreed with the government, and therefore it will remain in place, whatever the local Conservatives think of it. The clean air zone so far has been a success. Already nitrogen dioxide emissions have reduced by 13% right across the city as a result of introducing the clean air zone, and we're using the income that we're getting from the clean air zone to invest in other measures to clean the air right across the city. I'll just give you one example. We're installing an air quality monitoring station in each and every school right across the city out of the income we're receiving. We're the only party actually is determined and has a realistic plan to clean Birmingham's air.
Thank you. Julian.
The answer is probably too late. I think, and this is an example of the later you act and the longer you leave it, the worse the solution. So many people are critical of the CAS and the fact it has to charge, but part of the reason the council and the government ended up in that position was years and years of inaction of tackling air pollution around the city centre, and it's always easier and less painful to tackle things sooner than later. And to really get to grips with air pollution, not just in the city centre, but actually across the city, because it's an issue across the city, people desperately need alternatives to using their cars, and alternatives are cheap, easy and quick. And that's much better public transport, not just on a few corridors where, you're across City Line or something like that, but actually everywhere. And we get an extra metro line here, or a little bit of an extension there, or and that's kind of it. There isn't still yet the easy network of jumping on, which is also cheap, or even, dare I say it, free. Obviously, there's a lot of use of buses by people over 60, 65, because they've got a free bus pass. You make it easy or cheap or free to use, people will use it. And the really way to solve it long term is to provide those alternatives and make it easy for people to leave the car at home.
Thank you,
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for the question. It's absolutely vital that we tackle this. It's really a passion of mine. I've got a postgraduate diploma in air pollution control and management. So I actually went and studied this at university. And it's interesting, Ian always likes to roll out magic hedge as a kind of slur, and I appreciate he might not understand Clarke's third law, that it takes all the suitably advanced forms of technology appear as magic to people who don't understand them. But the University of Birmingham, universities across the world, cities like Singapore have shown that actually green infrastructure can remove 30 to 40% of pollutants from the atmosphere. That is way more than Labour's tax that they've introduced in the city has actually delivered. That's why you need to pivot from what Labour want to do, which is tax the poorest people in the city, and move to actually cleaning up our air. So introducing green infrastructure across the city, improving public transport, introducing electric charging points across the city as a proper network, electrifying the council's fleet. Instead of doing what the council's doing, which is pushing the most oldest, most polluting diesel vehicles out across the city because they don't want to pay their own tax in the city centre, thereby polluting roads which have school children on because having the most dirtiest, most polluting vehicles going down them. We introduced urban freight consolidation centres as well to remove freight vehicles in the city. The reality is only the local Conservatives have a plan to actually clean up the air we breathe across the whole city. If you want clean air, you need to vote Conservative next Thursday.
So we're going to be making up some time, so we're going to be going for a break at 12. So Sam, have you got another question for us that's been sent in, please?
Politics has become quite binary, mostly since 2016. It seems to matter more what political scarf people have around their neck than any policy. When was the last time you changed your mind on something politically, and why did you do it?
Julian Pitcher, we'll start with you.
It's a very good question. The last time I changed my mind politically, I think probably less changed my mind, but more kind of started to appreciate the importance of different issues and other issues. And I think that's by becoming a councillor, actually, appreciating, and before that working as a community campaigner, and dealing with people's real issues and on the ground struggles that people are dealing with. And I think that really has changed kind of my perceptions and my kind of how I see problems, and very much seeing it as kind of how is this going to affect, or how is somebody who living in my ward going to deal with this issue, or how are they going to feel about this particular policy. And there's nothing like speaking to people on the doorstep and listening to residents, not just when there's an election on, but all year round, to actually listen to something different, getting a different appreciation of people's kind of lived experience and real life struggles. And I think that is really important politicians to do. Too often the system means they don't need to do that. I do, and I really value it, and I think it's been really beneficial for me.
Thank you. John?
It is a very challenging question, isn't it? And I think as an opposition group lead, you can sometimes just follow the temperature slightly in terms of how worked up we are getting about something or not, or whether we're maybe dropping opposition to something. I think the previous questions is quite a good example of where things change. 15 years ago, when I was on the Transport Authority, they were looking at congestion zone proposals for the city, and I remember seeing two sets of proposals. Both of them seemed utterly unworkable at the time, and they were utterly unworkable. And I still think, with the Clean Air Zone, I think there are still some significant issues around the edges of having a charging system, particularly for the communities who are living on the edges of businesses within the boundaries. I think there's some significant issues. I do think the world has moved on. We have to confront the issues of climate change in particular, and we have to confront the way that in Birmingham, the city centre, sucks up all the wealth, and that wealth is not dispersed across the city, which is underpins some of the thinking I was talking about in the answer to the previous question. So I think you can see me possibly changing my stance on that a little bit over the last 15 years. I'll try and think of other examples as we go along. It's a good question.
Thank you. Robert Alden.
Thank you. All across the city, local Conservative candidates and councillors, hard-working people who really roll up their sleeves to work in their local community. And I think actually what's really important as part of the question is actually around, you're trying to get to, I think, do politicians actually listen to their local communities and engage with local communities, rather than going in with a hard, fast idea of what they want and then sticking with that regardless. Now, I think that's something we really try and promote in our candidates, is that they should be working in their local communities, they should be listening to what residents want and making sure that's reflected into the council as well. And it's something the council has been very poor at, listening to what residents actually wish. In terms of a leader, it's not so much how I've changed my views, but actually I've changed the views of our group, one might say. I've made our group more diverse since I became leader of the Conservative group, because for me it's really important that the Conservatives must represent the city of Birmingham, all people of Birmingham, not just one section of Birmingham. So I increased the diversity in the group. I've worked with the leaders of the Greens and Lib Dem party and backbench Labour councillors, interestingly, to be able to force the City Council to actually adopt a climate emergency, because the City Council wasn't going to adopt it, and it required all the parties coming together with the leaders of the opposition parties and backbench Labour councillors to be able to force the council administration to adopt a climate emergency. Absolutely, politics is, I think, getting more binary, but in local elections, I don't think that's such the case. And if you've got a hard-working person in your local area, a hard-working local Conservative candidate, I would say you should vote for them, no matter what your national politics opinion is, because it makes such a difference having hard-working councillors in your local community.
So we're going to go for a 5-minute break. We're going to be back.
Do I hear it?
We want to hear this.
Yeah. After Ian, we're going to go for a 5-minute break. Sorry, my bad.
That's okay, thank you. Let me just remind everybody what the question was. The question was, can you name an issue on which you've changed your mind politically? And I think it's very interesting that all three of my colleagues have struggled to answer that particular question. They haven't been able to come up with something where they talk about listening, but they couldn't come up with an example of where they've listened to something and changed their mind. I can, because I do listen very, very carefully to what the people of Birmingham are saying, and ironically, it's to do with the ward represented by Julian Pritchard, so I don't know why he didn't cite it as well, and that's Druids Heath. We set out some years ago to do some housing renewal in Druids Heath with a very limited budget of £50 million. Once we'd embarked on that project, it was very clear from the feedback from the people in Druids Heath that they weren't happy with that. They wanted something more comprehensive. They wanted the creation of a new centre, a place where they'd be proud to live and where others would be proud to visit. So as a result of having listened to that, the Labour Council has changed its position, changed its political position on this, and we're now looking to drive wider regeneration into Druids Heath to bring some real change. We're looking to develop carbon neutral homes in that particular part of Birmingham as we renew some of the housing there. We're looking to bring in wider areas of land so we've got more budget to deal with, so we can genuinely drive the kind of change in that community that the people that live in Druids Heath want to see.
Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm working in higher education with the City of Manchester about young people. And we all talk about the importance of voting, the importance of politics, because obviously it affects all of our lives. But funnily enough, when I was looking for information on my local MPs from my area, I did what any young person would do, went on Googled it, couldn't find anything. Then what does our generation do? We go on social media. Instagram, Facebook, couldn't find anything. Then we thought, oh, it's a bit more professional, so let's go on LinkedIn. Couldn't find any information. How do you expect the younger generation to trust you and be able to vote for you? And then local MPs, if we can't actually find any information about you in the media channels that we use, which is social media.
Generation X questions. Okay, let's start with you, John.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to know where you live, to know how you were so badly... Sorry?
Borsall Heath.
Borsall Heath, okay. I think some of the other leaders may have something to say about that. I mean, there's two levels to this, and my party, my councillors and myself, within the areas we represent, we maintain a very close contact with the constituents and the residents. We do regular newsletters all year round, and we make sure they're prominent so that people know to read them. I often meet people who don't read them, but what can you do? Similarly, personally, and I encourage our other candidates and councillors to do the same. I'm very active on Facebook, on Nextdoor. I'm reasonably active on Twitter, but Twitter's a sort of a medium where you have to be careful a little bit, but I respond to people on Twitter and I'm there. And you can find us. I do think your representatives have to be findable, and we believe as a party that actually we have to have a close relationship with the people we represent, because that's the whole point of it. You need to be able to talk at any time, not just at elections. You need to be able to communicate at any time with your elected representatives, and it may be a very local issue like bins that are not collected, or it may be a more significant issue like city council policy on something, but you need to be able to do that all through the year, not just at elections.
Thank you for that question, because I think all of us, the older we get, none of us getting any younger, struggle for communicating with younger people who are really up to speed with all of the social media access channels that there are. I have a Twitter account, it's called Brum Leader. I have another Twitter account, it's called Brum Labour Leader. So I am quite active in that sphere. And the Labour Party here in Birmingham for this election campaign, we've spent a record amount of money, over £20,000 on a social media campaign. So you should be able to find our manifesto, the policies we're fighting this election on social media. You should also be able to contact all of our candidates on social media as well. Borsall Heath, I'm afraid, we do owe you an apology, because the Labour candidate in the last election was elected in Borsall Heath. A guy called Zor Malik has badly let down the community in Borsall Heath, and I'm delighted to be able to tell you that he's now joined the Conservative group, and we're standing as Conservative candidate in these elections. So please don't vote for him. You've got 4 years of evidence that he's let you down. Vote for the Labour candidate in Borsall Heath.
Yeah, it's a very good question about how to reach different audiences, and I think being diverse in how we communicate in different ways is really important. Make sure we're accessible is really important. I think myself, I'm on social media. I could do more on it, but I do use it, and I am on there. I also do stuff in the real world as well, so I'm already regular newsletters. I speak to residents, not doors, not just when I'm out canvassing for votes, but actually just the rest of the time as well. So that, and my contact details are on all my newsletters, all literature, so people can get in touch and can find me, and that includes a social media link as well. And I think you've got to use all the tools in the box. So some of that is social media, some of that is being actually physically present and doing the old-fashioned way as well. You've got to do it all, you've got to do both. Because some people, like you said yourself, are going to be using social media, but some people are still not even online. And so that's why the old-fashioned way of letterbox is important as well. And there's nothing like meeting people in the flesh as well, actually speaking face to face. So hence why you've got to be also on the ground and speaking to residents in that way as well. So yeah, I think absolutely there's got to be multiple ways of getting in touch with people and making sure that we cover all the different ways that people can contact us.
Thank you. And as the leader of the council, I'm surprised Councillor Ward didn't realise that Borsall Heath actually covers 3 councillors. There's only 1 that's Conservative, 2 are Labour. And if you don't haven't been linked to some Conservative council at Zor Malik, because he's been doing lots since he joined the Conservative Party.
I find information on him, and it was from him moving from Labour to Conservative. That was the only thing that I could find.
There you go, you see. So that's the difference. Once he joined the Conservatives, they started doing that engagement, because we insist on our candidates doing that. Local councillors should be involved in their local community, available all year round. actually being embedded in their communities, working for residents. That's why you look at what I do in Edmonton. I ask all our candidates to do this. We do regular newsletters when we're councillor, on Twitter, on Facebook, engaging local communities. It's also important that people are going out in person, so they're attending residents' meetings, and indeed I've been to some residents' meetings with councillors all manner, looking at highways issues in Portsall Heath with local community members. Because it is about the range of communication, so that you can meet all people's ways they choose to engage with politics. So whether it be on social media, whether it be by print form, whether it be in person. Thank you.
Thank you. So ladies, I want another question from you. Over to you, and can you please say your name and if you're a part of an organisation or not?
Hi, can you hear me? Oh, is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, my name's Nazra, and I've been sitting here and I've been thinking, should I ask this question or not? Should I ask this question or not? And I thought, if I don't ask it, I probably won't get the answer. It's probably not even anything to do with local or things like that, but I'm really interested to know why Conservatives have rebranded to Local Conservative. Because if you don't like what your national party is doing, then you leave. Or if you, I mean, it's confusing people because people actually don't know what you're thinking. And I think as we all know what's happening nationally, we all know it's an absolute mess, but that will affect locals. So changing yourself, so it's almost like, does it now become local Labour, local Lib Dems, local this, or local Tories? So, because I've got a Tory in front, I think, I thought, let me ask the question, why did you decide to rebrand, and why wasn't there sort of a national thing about you rebranding? Because it sort of almost was like slipped in, suddenly you saw a leaflet with Local Conservative, and you're thinking, well, who's this, and what's this? But, so I think I just wanted to know what's the thinking about it, and do you really think it's going to make a difference trying to segregate yourself from the national? Thank you.
So it seems like that was targeted.
Yeah, I think that's for me. I think that was. Thank you very much for your question, and thank you for reading the leaflets that you've been having through the documents. That's really appreciated. So Local Conservatives is one of the 3 official names the party can use. So it's registered. It was registered in 2019 with the Electoral Commission. All parties have different names you can use to represent the type of elections you've got, or to represent the area you're representing. So we've chosen to use Local Conservatives. Most of our candidates with these elections are about local areas, for local elections. So we're standing obviously to about what we think we can do to make a difference here in Birmingham. We've got a plan to be able to clean up our city, to be able to make that difference. We've got cleaner streets. We've got a plan to be able to ensure we're investing in all parts of the city, levelling up across Birmingham, rather than just focusing on the city centre, as we've seen under the last decade of Labour administration. And that's why we're standing with Local Conservatives, because we think it's about time there's a change here in Birmingham, because Birmingham has been let down by this Labour administration over the last 10 years.
I'm going to open the question up a bit as well and make it more party relevant. So I guess this is a question about, does national politics affect local politics? There has been scandals in all of the parties at some point. Birmingham, in terms of Labour, more local. So let's rebrand that question for our other 3. Does national politics affect local politics, and does bad press affect people's opinions on parties?
I think clearly national politics affect local government elections. Part of the problem in this country is we live in one of the most centralised states in the world. I think it's only North Korea more centralised than the UK. Far too many of the decisions are taken in Whitehall rather than locally close to where people live. And clearly the national politics, and because most of our funding comes from central government, it does impact on local elections. I think Robert Alden's made a brave attempt at explaining this nonsense about local Conservatives, but it's even more confusing than he makes out, because some of the candidates are standing as local Conservatives, some others are standing as the Conservative candidate, so it's not clear. And despite what he says, it's obvious the reason they are trying to do this, and it's because they are embarrassed. And why would they not be embarrassed about what their government is currently doing? We've got the first Prime Minister and the first Chancellor of the Exchequer who have been convicted of breaking the law though they are in office. It's clear it's time for them to go, but they won't go. Not simply because they made the rules and then broke the rules, but because they have taken the rest of us for fools, and we should not allow them to get away with that. And I'm not surprised Robert Alden's embarrassed by it. He should be more clear in his condemnation of what the Conservative government has been doing.
I'm going to give you a 30-second response, Robert, and then we're going to move into our next.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's clear that there should be more devolution of power, so we're very clear in that. But I was just bemused by Ian's statement there. He's made a lot of comments about his views on the leaders of the Conservative Party. He hasn't told us if he thinks the same standard should be applied to Keir Starmer, and therefore is he calling for Keir Starmer to resign if he gets charged?
If Keir Starmer breaks the law, there's got to be a consequence for that. And I didn't pick up actually, Charmaine, about Liam Burton, because you asked me about scandals in the other party. That's fair enough. Well, let me just say this then. The party has accepted the sanction on Liam Burton. Liam Burton has apologised for what he's done, and he will serve his sentence.
Okay. John Hunt, over to you.
Yeah, there's some profound issues underneath this, aren't there? And in some ways I have sympathy with the devil because I think the Conservatives are in a very toxic situation at the moment. Boris Johnson's behaviour has been dreadful. The cabinet that he runs is utterly incompetent, and we touched on the issue around tuition fees earlier, where they're just allowing those to go up, the costs of those. And because that brings me back to being reflective about this, which I'm sorry that Ian Wall wasn't reflective, because Labour has had huge challenges over the years. Did he support the Iraq War or not? We'd want to know. We all have these challenges. I've been mentioned, Lib Dems have been mentioned over tuition fees. Why did I stay with the Lib Dems after Nick Clegg broke the promise on tuition fees? Because it wasn't what we as members voted for when they went into coalition. Because I'm fundamentally a Liberal Democrat, I believe the party has a huge amount to offer in terms of liberalism and democracy, and I believe in Birmingham, as we go forward as a group, we have demonstrated it in the last 10 years. We've demonstrated the alternative we offer to the people of Birmingham. It's been worth staying, but there are huge challenges sometimes when you have a government which lets you down, frankly. And another topic we touched on was schools. I led a rebellion at our party conference over the Academies programme. I was appalled that our MPs signed up to it and took schools away from local authorities the way they did. I led a rebellion over it. So we have to stand up to our own parties sometimes and be clear when we're doing so, because we have to stand for the fundamental principles that we believe we signed up to in the beginning, and that's what we do in the Liberal Democrats.
Julian.
Thank you. I think it's a really interesting question about national politics and local politics. And I really believe in local government. I really believe in councils and the power they can do. Unfortunately, they're chronically underfunded and chronically underpowered for what their potential is. And it's interesting to hear the other parties say that they're in favour of local government, but the way they treat local elections often tells you something very different, and the way they behave in national government again often tells you something very different. It's often seen as just a popularity contest, and the Labour Party National is branding this as a popularity contest about Boris, as opposed to talking about local issues council by council. And that's a real shame, because councils in their own right are really important, and your local councillor in their own right is really important. And as Greens, we're the community part of our DNA, and we're not top down, we're bottom up, we're very much a grassroots party where we kind of based in communities, we work with communities, and we're also not told what to do. So the other parties tend to, particularly the big ones, kind of whip their councillors and MPs to kind of vote a certain way or behave a certain way. We're free to kind of speak up and represent communities, and that for us makes it very powerful. So it's how it should be. It's about representing all the communities. It's about being there for people and listening to what they want, rather than just kind of coming in and trying to impose your party's policy.
Thank you. I know we've got a couple more questions in the audience, so I'm going to go to two more in the audience, and then we're going to have two more that was sent in, and then we're going to finish up with all of you in the audience. So we are going to get to you guys as soon as you make it out nice and early. So this gentleman here, and then I know that you have one as well. So I'm going to go to this gentleman here, then this young man here, then two online, then yourself, and yourself.
Hi.
Hi,
it's Neil Black. I live in the Jewellery Quarter. Are you, like me, embarrassed by the state of the city in terms of litter and graffiti, and what are you going to do about it? And it's not just clearing up, it's actually educating people not to do it.
Yes, frankly, I am embarrassed about the amount of litter and fly tipping that's taking place across Birmingham. What we've been doing about it is last year we invested 7.4 million in something that's proven to be really popular across the city, and these are mobile household recycling centres, and we increased our fly tipping clean-up crews in order that we can get on top of the fly tipping issue. This financial year we've invested a further £1.4 million in order that we can improve our weekly waste collection services, make the mobile household recycling centres permanent, and do even more to clamp down on fly tipping. Fly tipping is an issue that's not just impacted in Birmingham, it's been a national phenomenon that began, ironically, with the first lockdown 2 years ago, and nationally we've seen fly tipping increase by 17%. Here in Birmingham, because of the steps we've taken, we've bucked that trend. Over the last 12 months, fly tipping has been cut by 25%. We're also we're also clamping down on fly tippers. We take them to court. We're one of the only local authorities in the country that actually had a jail sentence opposed on fly tipping.
Let's move on to Julian.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And yeah, frankly, the state of some of the parts of our city is embarrassing. I absolutely agree. What should we do about it? At local level, I organise regular clean-ups in my area to try and help address this. Obviously, that on its own isn't going to solve the problem, but at least it's trying to get out there. And that, what I do find with that actually is that then that has a kind of ripple effect, because then you see people going out and doing it themselves. I've advertised it in my newsletters. And then I see people and hear people say, "Oh, I'm doing litter picking on my own now, so I saw you were doing it." And so that has a ripple effect, and that kind of behaviour and sharing good practice kind of has that knock-on effect. But we need to do more, and I think the MHRCs are a nice idea, but there's so many things you can't take to them. So really bulky things you can't take to those mobile household recycling centres, and we don't have a free bulky waste collection. And this new fly tipping money that's announced, I've yet to see much impact on it, certainly on the ground in areas that I know in my ward.
Thank you. Let's move on to Robert Holden.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for your question. 2007, when we were last running a council here in Birmingham, Birmingham was voted the cleanest city in Britain. And after a decade of Labour, Birmingham's not going to be winning that title anytime soon. And that is the devastating impact we've seen under Councillor Ward's leadership, first as Deputy Leader of the Council and then Leader of the Council over that 10 years. It's not good enough. Fly tipping is up over 84% in that time. Enforcement is down 40% in that time. 99% of all fines issued happen in the city centre, nothing in the rest of the city. That's why only the Conservatives have got a plan to clean up our city. Plans have free bulky waste collections, dedicated clean-up crews in your local neighbourhood, clearing rubbish as soon as it's dropped, so it's off the streets and doesn't encourage more, getting graffiti removed. And the only way to deliver that on May the 5th, next Thursday, is by voting for your local Conservative candidates.
John.
Thank you, and this is a question which, as a local councillor, worries me more than anything else. It certainly worries my constituents more than anything else. It's not just the state of the streets, the uncollected and the unresolved fly tipping, and the waste collection service, which is simply failing now, and it's failing not just because of COVID and not even just because of HGV driver shortages. There are fundamental problems with the Birmingham's waste collection service that need addressing. The consequence of those failures is black bags on streets, bins overloaded with black bags, all lying on the streets, and black bags not being collected. I wish Robert would stop saying only the Conservatives have a plan, because it's just not true. We all have plans on that, and we have significant plans that we put forward for tackling this. I think what's happened in the last 10 years, it's taken Labour 9 years to wake up to the problem which they've presided over, and they've levied very small cuts, but like £500,000 on the fly tipping team a few years ago, demolished the team, demolished its morale, and the money spent in the last year has sadly been ineffective. It's a real shame.
I'm going to be really strict. I'm used to being on the radio where I can just like pull down the lever. So I'm trying to be polite, but you know, let's get brutal.
That's 12 years and seeing a Conservative government completely ruin the funding that is available for those with a disability. They make you actually prove that you're not lying, that you're disabled. How are you going to actually improve that? Because the Equality Act says you're meant to look after the protected characteristics, including disability and race, and these two are always neglected and always have been. And I have to prove that what I need is necessary and not necessary. And the care system has completely let down and fallen because Labour filled those money gaps and they improved it, only for it to be ripped up and ruined by the Conservative Party. How do you seek to address the funding gap and improve it? And how do you also actually, when are you actually going to take responsibility and make sure disabled people have their rights, whether it's physical or unseen disabilities?
Who would you like to start to answer your question?
I'm going to go to the Conservative.
You, Robert.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for bringing up the issue. It's clearly something you're really incredibly passionate about. If we take control of council next week, then we'd be looking to work with all groups. Because you're quite right to talk about the Equality Act and the need for councils to make sure they're supporting all groups across our city. And that would absolutely include disability groups in the city, and certainly if we take control of council, we're very happy to meet with you and make sure that the council's doing all it can to support.
I found it difficult to see that in the last 12 years.
Yeah, obviously we haven't been running the council in the last 12 years. It's a Labour-run council, and so I can only talk about what we do. If we were taking control of council, if we take control, then we'd be very happy to work with you and other disability groups in the city.
People that are affected by disability.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. We'd work with all disability groups in the city, but I was also extending the offer to the questionnaire to also meet with you.
Okay, let's move on to Julian.
I think you're absolutely right. How people with disabilities are treated in terms of how they claim support is absolutely appalling, and the onus is that they're kind of guilty until proven innocent is absolutely not on it. It's what people have to go through to kind of prove that, and what people then told they can and can't do after some of these assessments is appalling. It is obviously a national government thing, and that's very much the Conservative government that's been putting that in. Councils could do more to challenge that. They could always do more to challenge that. But ultimately, that problem and that appalling way that people with disabilities are treated in terms of the benefit system is very much a national government policy. I think in terms of what the council can do, there's been some serious failings that this Labour administration have done in terms of its responsibilities, and those should be improved and seriously looked at, and what's happened in the last 4 years has not been good enough.
Thank you. Ian?
Thank you. Well, as I said earlier, equality is the core value of the Labour Party. I think it's absolutely disgraceful what the Conservative governments have done with funding for disabled people over the last decade. As I said earlier, the local Conservatives are no different from the National Party, and I personally do not believe the Tory Party believes in equalities at all. The Labour Council has produced a document called Everyone's Battle, Everyone's Business. It's received plaudits up and down the country as the most radical proposal on equalities produced by any local government, and we seek to constantly promote those that have disabilities. And just next year, this city, thanks to Labour, will be hosting the World Blind Games. Not many people know about this at the moment, but it will give a platform for blind people to demonstrate their sporting prowess. Many of these sports are difficult enough, I think, anyway, let alone trying to compete in them when you're blind. So I'd encourage people, it's at the end of August next year, Birmingham University, do go along and see it.
So Sam, can we get 2 more questions that were sent in? And then we'll
Good response.
John? Oh, why? Go on then, John. I didn't mean to forget you. After John, we're going to go to Sam.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And without knowing your particular circumstances, it's difficult to be quite sure what underpins your problems. But In terms of what the council does, and I mean, Ian, I think, glossed over the council's record on this because we do have a situation where the city council has very badly let down the young people with additional needs and disabilities in the last few years. And part of that is down to poor oversight of a service that was failing, a very slowness to tackle and address issues, and that comes back to a fundamental issue, which is again comes back to talking to you and people like you, which is a council that listens, because the problem we've had with the city council in recent years, and maybe not just in recent years too, because Birmingham is a large city, is a city council that fails to listen to its people. It doesn't have the mechanism to do it, it doesn't have the culture to listen to it, and we, the elected people who lead it, need to be at the forefront of the listening, and we need to have people leading the council who listen to people when they're telling them their problems.
Thank you. Sam, over to you.
What's your vision for the city that's been plagued by youth violence, and do you see a role for youth services?
Okay, let's go to Julian.
I think it's one where we invest much more in youth services. There are ways we could do that when there are kind of new developments being planned in areas. You know, how much money can we get out of those for new youth resources? Can we bring back more council buildings that are out of use into use for new facilities? And yeah, it's absolutely appalling there's been no investment in youth services over the past 10 years until this year. And yes, obviously we know the council's financial situation, but it's also about priorities and what you do with the money you have. I'm in I represent the Walking Druids Youth in Monohall, which is lucky enough to have one of the few remaining kind of youth centres in the city, the Maypole Youth Centre, and I know the good work that does. But even what they have is not enough even for just my ward, let alone the wider catchment they actually serve. So yeah, we need much more investment, and it's one where we've got youth clubs in all communities.
So in our proposals this year, we have proposals to devolve funding back to local communities so they can make the choices. Youth services, local communities know where the youth services need to be. They can support professional youth workers, they can support local voluntary organisations in working with young people. There is too little going on at the moment, and for all sorts of reasons, but simply failing to resource local communities means that very, very little happens, and as a result we have the problems. We certainly have it in my ward, where we've had to have intense police activity to deal with problems of young people, and it's not desirable at all. We need something different.
Robert?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the question. As a Conservative council, if we take control next week, then we'll be looking to introduce a youth community chest. That'll be funding for every single ward across the city, so that each ward can actually ensure there's youth provision, youth services that are tailored for their local area, funded in their local community. So it operates very much like the community chest used to operate in the city, rather than it just being the city speaking, the council imposing people. It would be decided by local community residents, hiring the organisation they feel are best for their area. So you come to the north of the city where I am, Urban Devotion, YMCA do an awful lot of good youth work, but that wouldn't necessarily be the right organisation in every part of the city. So it's about empowering local communities by providing the funding and then making local councils working with local communities be able to deliver that for the local community. It's also then about making sure we attract more jobs into the city and skilling up residents to ensure that people also have a path into employment as they grow up in life as well.
Thank you. And Ian, can you face the mic a bit more, please?
Sure.
Project, thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's very easy for the opposition parties to talk about they're going to spend money on this, that and the other. They never talk about where that money is coming from. And the truth is, this City Council, Birmingham City Council, has its budget cut by £750 million by the Conservative government over the last decade, and that's why we struggle to fund some of these things. We've also lost 1,000 police officers in our city and the wider region. We are going to be working with the Labour PCC, the Labour Party in Birmingham, to put 450 police officers back on the streets. We're also investing £1 million in additional youth workers that are going to be targeted at knife crime. Knife crime has exploded in this country under the Conservative government. They do not have the policies to tackle crime. They are no longer the party of law and order, and they simply cannot be trusted on this issue any longer.
Thank you. Our second question, Sam.
What are your top 3 priorities if elected?
John, we'll start with you.
The headlines this week. What does each party's representative think their party should do to address the issue of misogyny?
Ian, thank you.
Misogyny is absolutely unacceptable. It's abhorrent, and the comments that were made about Angela Rayner last week by members of the Conservative Party nationally are absolutely disgusting. Robert Alden has spoken several times this morning about how he's made the Conservative group more diverse. Well, let me tell you, there are just 4 women in the Conservative group, just 4 women. So when it comes to diversity and the rights of women and defending safe spaces for women, it is the Labour Party that is going to be the party that delivers on that agenda. And I'm quite clear for this city. We have to continue to protect the rights of women in this city. We have to continue to ensure there are safe spaces for women. And women's sport in particular, we have to make sure that there's a level playing field there and that we protect women's sport for women.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes, thank you for the question. And yes, some of the stories we've seen this week have been absolutely appalling. And I think it's a real problem. And it will naturally put women off going into politics, I think, which is, what we really don't want and don't need, because we need to make politics more diverse and more representative, not less. If only about a third of councillors across the country are women, needs to do much more to kind of increase that and change that. And that starts also with the culture as well in the council chamber. You see some of the scenes at Westminster, some of the scenes in the council chamber as well, from both sides, I'm afraid, do make it rather aggressive and intimidating. Why would anybody want to go into that? And it doesn't help. I think it's about headhunting, it's about asking and not just expecting candidates and people who get involved to come to you. We're going and finding good, fantastic winning candidates.
Thank you. Robert Alden.
Thank you, and Claire, good to see you again. This one is totally unacceptable, and I just echo what everyone else has said. I think about the comments that we've seen this week made about Angela Rayner, totally unacceptable, and whoever said that certainly has no place in the Conservative Party, in my eyes. I would just add one thing though. It's about actions, not just words, and the Labour Party are very good at talking about words. But when you had a motion of no confidence brought by female Conservative councillors in the administration, they wouldn't let them speak. They tried to talk them out, so they weren't allowed to speak in the debate, rolling male councillors up to talk over female councillors. When the Lib Dems tried to do the same, the Labour Party wouldn't let their female councillor raise their motion of no confidence. It's all very well saying nice things in a hustings, but if you try to silence female councillors when they're in the council chamber, then those actions speak an awful lot louder than your words at the hustings.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. And firstly, yes, to maintain zero tolerance of misogynistic behaviour, but also to recognise that as men we may not fully understand what misogynistic behaviour is, and to be listening and to be ready to be told if things are going wrong. That instance in the council chamber, when my ward colleague Maureen Jan wanted to lead the debate on waste collection services, which again we discussed as a fundamental issue in the city. It was interesting that Maureen in that council meeting was the only woman councillor who was lined up to lead any debate on that afternoon, and there were a lot of items on the agenda. She was the only woman councillor lined up to lead a debate, and she was filibustered. So she did get to speak in the end, but nobody else got to speak in the debate, so it wasn't much of a debate. so she did not get to lead a good debate on waste management services. I think we have agreed between us that we actually need within the council to bring forward a group of leading women councillors to advise us on how to take these things forward, because we're clearly not getting it right.
Thank you. Can we take this gentleman's question and your question at the same time, and then we're going to come over to you, and my final one, we're going to join it up. We're going to join up. Yeah, this gentleman here, if you give your question, and then we're going to take yours and we can answer them both at the same time.
Hello everyone, thank you for the organisers and thank you for everyone for coming. My question is very much about, very passionate about this, I'm sure everybody's cost of living and the huge rise in fuel bills, and we all seen, that the fuel bills that have gone up, which has affected all of us and affected us again. My question is on there that, the council talks about retrofitting, but currently it will take 2050 to get all the council homes retrofitted. Shouldn't more be done about this? And we talk about localism, but this debate, this should be a big issue. This should be a conversation to the whole of the city. So I really ask, what are your plans really in order to meet the needs on there, and in order to create the jobs you want, there needs to be a plan of people working together. Are the universities and the technical colleges working together to train up these long-term engineers? It's not like a week's job, it'll take years, so there needs to be a whole comprehensive plan. So it's about them working together. So that's my question to you guys. What is how do you get those local powers, and definitely recommend actually engaging with the community where they are. That's my question.
That's a really good question. But we're going to go over to this gentleman here just to ask his questions so they can combine them together. Sorry, that one just there. And we will be following up on all of these questions on the Different Anglez Show, especially when the next leader is being voted in as well. So this isn't the end, this is just the beginning.
So public safety is a really significant concern for young people, especially those in marginalised genders. There's been an epidemic in drink spiking in bars and nightclubs across the country over the last year. Most responses nationally have centred around policing, but over the last couple of years we've seen sickening displays of police brutality at Sarah Everard Vigil, systemic bigotry being exposed in the London Met, leading to the resignation and shame of President Dick, terrifying abuses of police power on Manchester University campuses, and just this week the Home Affairs Committee report found that spiking victims are routinely brushed off as having one too many, and that police, quote, won't do anything, unquote. Young people increasingly are feeling that policing is just not the solution, and police presence makes a lot of young people, especially our siblings of colour, feel less safe, not more. How will your council find new solutions to public safety, considering that trust in their outdated traditional mechanisms such as policing is so irreparably demolished?
Two big questions and not much time, but like I said, we will be carrying on this discussion in the weeks ahead. So let's start with Robert. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you both for the questions. In terms of retrofitting and cost of living energy bills, clearly they provide a massive opportunity. We can retrofit homes in the city to be able to lower bills, that makes it more affordable for people, but also actually to be able to bring in those high-skilled jobs, well-paid jobs into the city you mentioned. And that's a really key part of our plan around trying to make sure that Birmingham benefits from the green industrial revolution that's going to be driving growth and employment over the next couple of decades, both here in the city and in the country. In terms of security and feeling safe, there was a lot of work actually done cross-party around trying to tackle some of the disgraceful attacks that there have been, homophobic assaults that have been in the city. That was completely unacceptable to happen. So some of that was around CCTV, and I do welcome the cameras that were put in by the council. I think all parties wanted to see that put in, community groups as well. But it's about going further than that as well, so expanding CCTV where appropriate, also making sure we've got a plan to put in council-funded security, so not using the police, but actually like a lot of business improvement districts do, using council-funded security to provide that support and security in local centres across the city.
Ian Ward.
Thank you. First of all, on the cost of living crisis, I absolutely agree with you. I speak to people right across this city who are struggling now and having to make choices between eating and heating their homes. And the government, of course, have chosen this very moment to increase tax, making the situation worse. What we're doing, we're currently speaking to Severn Trent to see if we can get people across this city a rebate on their water bills. We're the only local authority in the country doing that. it's Labour-led. On retrofit, we're working with our other two cities in the West Midlands, Coventry and Wolverhampton, on a retrofit programme for social housing. It's almost 190,000 homes across the three cities. And here in Birmingham, we are piloting 300 council homes that we're going to make carbon net zero in the next 2 years, and we're working with the universities on the technology. On the police situation, I think any bigotry by any police force is to be absolutely condemned. Policing in this country is by consent, and the police need to rebuild trust between themselves and young people across this country. I was appalled at the arrest of that lady at a vigil in London by the Metropolitan Police during one of the lockdowns. What I will say about the West Midlands Police, I don't think they have the same headlines as the London Police.
Jonathan. Thank you. Two questions there. Firstly, in terms of cost of living crisis, very difficult to address immediately, but we need and we should be. We've failed to, not just to do the insulation, but also to develop the alternative power sources. The City Council has a huge estate. It could be harvesting huge amounts of alternative energy for the people of Birmingham. Secondly, what could be done more immediately? Today I chose to come by bus. I'm going to be using the bus more. Is to make sure those bus services are available and affordable, and we propose bringing in a Brum ticket, which is a capped cost for running around Birmingham on the bus, amongst other things. In terms of policing has lost its way in recent years, partly because of the relentless cuts. We heard some reference to that. All parties in 2019 agreed to increase police numbers, but those increased numbers need to be police who are connected with communities, who are based in communities and not based in big central buildings running around in squads.
Thank you. Julian.
Thank you. And yeah, on the public safety, I think some of this is about how you design public spaces, how you design spaces to make them safe, and to have kind of what we could call natural surveillance, so that you kind of design some of these problems without maybe having more strong interventions. On the retrofitting the cost of living, we've seen the council do a lot of kind of pilot projects, and a little bit here and a little bit there. It needs to do it at scale, and it needs to be zero carbon, so when it retrofits and when it builds, do you stop now? Because there's no point retrofitting now and then to retrofit again in 10 years because it wasn't good enough. The better and sooner you tackle a problem, the easier it is to solve. And so doing that now is, and doing it at scale and zero carbon as possible is vital. And finally, on the cost of living, the other thing the council will do is it could look at the council tax reduction. It is currently, like I said, 20% for most people, and looking at those for some of the people on the lowest incomes.
Thank you. Our final question, and I'm going to double mine up with yours as well.
Actions do indeed speak louder than words. In view of the platitudes we've just been sitting through about listening to people, about the value of clean air and open spaces, how on earth can the council possibly justify commercially developing a local nature reserve, Edgbaston Reservoir, within a mile of the city centre? It beggars belief that they're actually doing this. What is the position of each of the parties on this matter, which is a matter of enormous concern to the thousands of people who regularly use that reservoir as a means of peace, quiet, quality of life, and improvement of the general health?
And due to time, I'd like to also add my final question, which is, why should people vote for you? So if you can answer them both together, that would be really helpful. So let's start with Robert.
Thank you, and the first one's really easy from a Conservative point of view because we think it's the wrong thing to be doing. Edgbaston Reservoir is an incredible community asset. You saw during COVID just how well used it is, and it should be being enhanced, not built over. So that's the position of the Conservative group, and I'm pretty sure our candidates in the area have been letting residents know that as well. In terms of the elections as a whole, this is a real opportunity after 10 years of a Labour council to get change here in Birmingham. If you want to have cleaner streets in the city, if you want to protect your green spaces, if you want to make sure the roads are fixed, and to make sure we level up the whole of Birmingham so we can get that investment that's been seen in the city centre out across the whole city to make sure that all communities in all parts of Birmingham are actually benefiting from the council's financial power. And the only way to deliver is by voting for local Conservatives next Thursday, because we're the only party standing on 101 seats against the Labour Party. So we're the only people who can take control of the council next Thursday.
Ian? Well, first of all, on the Edgbaston reservoir situation, we are looking to introduce some housing around the reservoir, and we're looking to create surplus, or use the surplus from creating that housing to invest in the nature reserve, ensure it is preserved for future years. There are currently 600 parks and public green open spaces in Birmingham. Our plan is to increase that to 1,000 by the end of the decade. And as to why you should vote Labour, well, I've outlined this morning Labour's positive vision for our city, a clean city, a safe city and a better city. And there's no doubt that the city faces challenges, but it's only the Labour Party that's produced a manifesto that is a serious plan to tackle those changes. And as I've outlined this morning, the choice at this election is simple. You can either vote for Labour's plan for a safer, better and cleaner Birmingham, or you'll end up with a Conservative council that constantly talks down the city and will be in cahoots with the Conservative government that has rubbished this city for over a decade. Birmingham Labour has a positive vision for the city, and together with the people of Birmingham, we will build that cleaner, safer, better Birmingham for everyone. So vote Labour on Thursday, May the 5th.
Thank you. From what I understand, what's happening at Edgbaston Reservoir is a classic case of the City Council centrally imposing its plans on a local community. And this links to my pitch for what we would do, because we will devolve resources and power to local communities, and it's not just platitudes, because we have demonstrated it in my ward, in my community. We are only the second in the city to adopt a statutory neighbourhood plan, which incidentally protects the green spaces, develops new green spaces, and we are expecting a battle to implement it.
Thank you. Finally, Ian.
Yeah, I'll go to Reservoir. I think, again, it's a classic case of Labour and Council just not listening to local people and to the community. In terms of why you should vote for Green Party candidates, in wards across the city, we've got hard-working Green Party campaigns and candidates helping people and trying to make a difference to their communities. Other parties, particularly Labour, often takes votes for granted and will make lots of claims about what they will do, only for residents never to see or hear from them after the election. So it's understandable that communities and residents often feel ignored and not listened to. We're different. Community politics, as I've said already today, is one of our core values, and it means our campaigns are already working and succeeding in communities before not even being elected as councillors, and we can do even more as you're elected councillors. We do politics by working with residents rather than doing things to them. So if you want to change for Labour in your area, vote for them, and you hear from your hard-working Green Party campaigns, do vote for them, for councillors that listen to you, that turn up and that work with you to get things done.
That is the end of our Birmingham Leaders Hustings. We want to thank all of the party leaders, Robert Oldham, Gillian Cooper, John Hunt, and Julie York, for being with us today. I also want to thank you for being with us in our audience, those who are online and those who are listening through New Style Radio as well. Thank you for putting it in your diary and keeping your date with us. And finally, I want to thank Aston Students Union, also Helen and the whole team in hosting this today in this space, and all the work that we've put in, the blood, sweat and tears that we've put in together to pull this together. Finally, as well, I want to thank Fresh, Sam as well for the technical stuff, and Sam for answering and asking the questions and all that. Well, sorry, for asking the questions on behalf of those who sent them in. And finally, it's election next week, Thursday, everybody. I don't do this or work so hard to create these platforms for people not to vote. So make sure next week, Thursday, you go out and vote, have a look at the manifestos, they're online, I checked. They're online, go and have a look, do your research, do your due diligence, because it's your voice that will be heard next week, Thursday. This is your opportunity. So for all of those who are out there that don't believe in voting or say our voices aren't heard, this is the democratic way that we've got. And so let's use it. On that note, I will be back next week on a Different Anglez Show on New Star Radio Online. And this conversation will continue with the new leader, plus the leaders, because they know I have them on the show regular anyway. And we'll keep grilling them, so it's not over, this is just the beginning. Thank you all for being here. That's it from me. I'm Charmaine Burton, your host.